So the term missing is kind of similar to the legal term sex trafficking, in that they're both typically misunderstood. So our next panelist, who's again a member of the task force, is Shaw Talebi. He is the statewide human trafficking coordinator. And so I'm hoping you can explain the nuance and complexity of the term missing.
Thank you. I first want to say I'm honored and humbled to be included on this panel with the strong women up here. So my role is at the Attorney General's office. It's a new role to address trafficking in terms of policy, kind of overall system change. And I think the main thing that I always have to start with is demystifying what trafficking means. I think we have what we see on TV, what we see sometimes from advocacy groups, where if you're fundraising,
Can't hear you.
Yeah, put it closer to you.
Can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
There you go.
Okay. I won't restate all that again, but basically whenever I go do a training or talk to people about trafficking, it's always a start of demystifying. I think what we see on TV, what we see in movies, and at certain times people maybe exaggerate in order to pull on heartstrings. And the problem with that is that you're minimizing the actual harm. We don't need to do that, because the trauma that this causes, essentially trafficking comes down to the privilege exploiting, for the most part, the most vulnerable in our society. Those that purchase sex are in a position of power, in a position of privilege, and those that traffic or sell individuals are basically exploiting or taking advantage of those certain vulnerabilities, whether it's past trauma, socioeconomic issues, cultural issues. And so similarly with the term missing, it doesn't necessarily mean that someone's been kidnapped, but someone that is in a situation that is missing means they're obviously not in a place where they're comfortable enough to contact people, or they're isolated in that sense. And so there's kind of that inherent danger and harm and trauma when we're talking about both of these issues. And so I want to save enough time, but I think when we do talk about these topics, don't necessarily just picture the people in white vans pulling people in or being shipped in boxes. So
Thank you for the accurate understanding for us. Next, I'm going to move on to Lisa Watkins-Victorino, who's the Director of Research at the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. And Lisa, the question that I have to you to expound on that is, can you provide an example from the task force regarding clarity about what missing means in the context of our task force?
So, okay, I'll try and speak louder. Okay, how's that? Woo, okay. So for our task force, some of the things that we've been talking about and that we've been learning are some of the issues with terminology, right? What is the term being used? And what is interesting is that for adult women, and so I'm tasked more with looking sort of at the data piece, right? But for adult women, missing is not an offense, right? So for me, some of those questions come up then, okay, well, how does it get communicated into the data system? How does it get recognized? If it's not an offense, what is the sort of the police response to reported missing women? What are the statistics around the actual reporting? So we have some questions that we developed in the task force that we've given out, and are hoping to get some of those responses from our police department, or all of them that are participating. And but for youth, it's a little different. So missing could be, it is a status offense, So that will be found in the data, right? So you'll have something that you can see as runaway. But what was interesting is when we were talking with some of our service providers on the task force and with our police representation or representatives on the task force, one of the notes that we have in our large spreadsheet that we've been gathering a lot of information on is some of the differences. And so this is where, when we talk about the definitions, why it's so important to understand how people are actually classifying. So perhaps, so the example was, perhaps Child Welfare Services will say a child or youth is missing, but the police report or the police classification is runaway. So my question is, can we use them interchangeably? If I looked at the data from one to the other, how much does that sort of match between community stakeholder and police data? And then how are those terms used interchangeably? So I think it's really important to understand when we start looking at terminology, how it impacts data collection, how it impacts data reporting, and just how are we asking the right questions, right? So what I really liked about what Lisa represented is she can see it, right? She knows it's increasing in her community, but at the time didn't know what to call it. So maybe it's really thinking through what the community is seeing. How does that transfer to the language that's getting used for the classification of categories that our police are collecting, right? And there may not be, and you'll see that a little later, there may not be a one-to-one, right? So what we're gonna see is we might see something in the community, but we're not seeing that reflected, right, in the police data. So there's a lot of education that has to happen.
Thank you, Lisa. And for everyone, Lisa's going to speak later as well to deepen how anemic some of these data collection structures that we've been handed to measure this issue are, and the importance of doing something that's more community-based. So thank you, Lisa. So I'm just going to zoom out for a second. There's been, the first written record of sex trafficking in Hawaii was in 1825. Yet it was only this May 2022 that the United States government officially recognized Native Hawaiians in MMIWG efforts and awareness. And that was only because we pushed them to do so. In 2017, Affirm Hawaii, a Kanaka, an immigrant all-volunteer feminist organization, held the first known public protest explicitly against MMIWG at the state capitol. And in 2018, the Commission on the Status of Women was able to publish some of the first series of reports on measuring this issue in Hawaii, or initially trying to measure this issue in Hawaii. And we were met not just with total disbelief, but extreme hostility. And it is not just that, but one of the things that continues today is a malicious discrediting of survivors that speak on sex trafficking, and this question still that is it really that bad in Hawaii? So I want to turn to our foremost experts on this panel. First is Ashley Maha'a. She is the founding organizer of the Community Against Exploitation Hawaii, which is the first sex trafficking survivors and lived experience experts group. And so the question that I have to Ashley just out the gate, do you think from your organizing, is MMIWG real? Is sex trafficking that bad in Hawaii?
Aloha everyone, I hope you guys can all hear me. When I first read that question, I have to say that I absolutely laughed. Is MMIWG real? And I called you and I was like, is this a joke question? And then you said, people actually don't believe that it's real. And for me, I really had to think about that. Like, how can you believe that people aren't missing? Because that's what MMIWG is, right? It's people who are missing and murdered. You're telling me that's not real? All we're inputting is that we're focusing on the issue here, which is the Native Hawaiian women and girls, because they are going missing and we're not talking about it. And both can be true. Like, people are missing and a lot of Native Hawaiian women and girls are missing. so absolutely, MMIWG is real. And all you have to think is, are people missing? Are they murdered? Like, that doesn't happen in a vacuum, we see that. So absolutely, it's real. Is sex trafficking that bad in Hawaii? This is another one that people don't believe. And so what I like to say is, when you walk down Waikiki, you see the shops, you see all of the people, but you also see a plethora of strip clubs and massage parlors, and people walking down the street who may look a little fancier than other people. But the thing is, when I looked up how many strip clubs we had compared to other states, when you think of a place with a lot of strip clubs, you think like Las Vegas comes to mind because we all fly there. And Las Vegas has about 25 like registered facing strip clubs, and we have about 14. And Las Vegas is accessible to people by car. You can walk there, you can take a bus there, you can take a train. But we have almost as many strip clubs here in a place where you have to fly to visit. A very expensive place. We also, if you type in massage parlors, the first thing that comes up is an erotic site that claims that there's over 2,000 erotic massage parlor masseuses here. And that's disturbing to me. That's the first thing that comes up. So for me, we can recognize as people that there is a huge sex industry here. And I can tell you from the many people that I talk to that many of them don't want to be there. They would rather be doing something else. People don't just choose that because it's an alternative to a six-figure job where they're doing what they love. There is a lack of choice that is going on there. And if we can all just focus on that, like, yes, there's a huge sex industry here. And it is impossible for everybody to be a willing participant in that. And when you take that choice away, whatever it may be, that's trafficking. And so when I kind of focus it on that, of just if you really think about the choice that is taken away from that person, the legal definition is the taking of that choice by force, fraud, or coercion. But we also have to look at other factors, because what about, like, what are we placing that choice against? So absolutely, sex trafficking is occurring.
Thank you, Ashley. In the interest of time, I'm going to introduce our next panelist and then cue you for this question. So Dolly Tatofi is an organizer with an organization called Pohana Ona Wahine. I hope you've heard of it. If you haven't, it's an organization of Native Hawaiian survivors of domestic violence who organize with each other to fight this political issue. And so Dolly, I want to ask you, because when we host these events, sometimes there's a reluctance to name the issue. So why is it important to say these words? Why is it important that we had this title?
Well, it just kind of goes back, and I'm connecting to Representative Eli, and just having that, to be able to come forward and speak on something that nobody knows, when, to me, it's like the questions that come up is, when did things